Mitch, I know we're looking for a working title, but we cannot name the podcast "The Business of Theater in Like a Lion."
Oh, a lot- in like Lion King, maybe.
Hmm. It
Let's
could
talk.
also be a lion, uh,
Be a lion.
but in like a lion because it's spring, and in terms of the weather, I think it's tied to a month or the weather in general. But anyway, in like a lion, out like a lamb. I feel like this season definitely came in like a lion for many reasons
Oh
um,
yeah.
that we
This
will talk about.
Well, there's no doubt this is one of the busiest new play and musical seasons. Every year at this time is tight. There, I
Yeah.
mean, there are critics that are complaining that they have to go to three things a week
Hmm.
before the Tony deadline.
I should be a
I
critic. I'm already.
Yeah,
I already have
I,
that dance card.
yeah, and I'm going. The only problem with that, of course, is not all of it's good.
Yeah.
I don't want to bring it up. Again, I don't mention titles, but I saw something this week that, again, New York professional actors. The music was spectacular. The orchestrations were spectacular. They were rich. I enjoyed every second, and the show was as amateur as a middle school review.
Hmm.
But the way they put it together and the people in it could read as they said in the old days, they could read the phone book and make you excited,
Bit by bit.
you know? So it's a shame that that much money has to be spent on something that doesn't need to be done,
Yeah.
and that much money goes into it. Oh my goodness. Uh,
Absolutely. By the way, this is The Business of Theater, a working title. I'm Darnell Radford.
I'm Mitch Weiss.
And now we can get down to business. That was just
Okay.
small talk. So, Mitch, we have the reason it's in like a lion is because there's been a bit of chaos in society in general. But we are talking about how that chaos affects the arts community, both for and nonprofit. And
Yeah.
we've heard a lot about tariffs. We've heard a lot about the NEA and various dismantlings of support, not just for arts and culture, but also for the library system. And for science and technology, like a lot of foundations that cities reinvented themselves on. Technology, medicine, education, all of those things are being compromised as if the person who is running the country has no interest in the country's success.
Well, and we're all trying to be careful with the political aspect of this, but the truth is, uh, the in my less than humble opinion, the ends do not justify the means.
Correct.
If you agree, and there are people out there who believe the world order needs to be changed radically, got
Mm.
it. Now, do you do it with chaos? Do you just throw it out there that nobody can predict what they're supposed to do next week with their business, with their families, with their pensions, with their retirement? So, and bringing it back to theater, right, which is a little safer for us to talk about, perhaps that is what so many of the nonprofits and regional theaters are stuck with. They started with chaos to begin with, coming out of a pandemic, and now they can't even count on the little bit of security they thought they had.
Yeah.
What what does anyone as a leader of a nonprofit do? What do you think? How do they navigate through this?
Well, I know this isn't completely true for everybody, but sometimes it feels like we don't want everyone to know that our house isn't in order.
Mm,
We're trying to create a strong face because basically it seems like the grant makers are looking to see who fails. And instead of thinking about like, how do we lift all boats? they're saying perhaps this will weed out those who can't, sustain through this.
And yet the pandemic already did that.
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
talked about this many times. There was one week in which 8 theater companies in Seattle, Washington went under permanently.
Hmm.
That has nothing to do with government chaos or funding chaos. They just couldn't find a way to stay afloat at all.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of this. The issue is, why does the nonprofit arts exist at all? I think it's because we think it's good
Hmm.
and we
And
want it
good
there,
for society.
and good for society and entertaining and educational, whatever your purpose is, for that particular institution. Uh, you know, uh, the prices on Broadway cannot be sustained in the middle of Ohio or Indiana. And so, in order to present something decent, it costs money.
Yeah.
And the nonprofit model, maybe that needs to change, but that hasn't come up for discussion. And that's part of where the chaos is. If we do need a completely new model, then let's discuss that, which you and I have done, right? We've
Yeah.
talked about a new normal.
And which you wouldn't remedy by just immediately shutting it down, especially when the funding had already been allocated. It's not like this funding cycle had not completed. Like, let's say you did all the work to submit your grant proposal, and let's be honest, nonprofits, everyone waits
Hmm.
until the last day it is due. If you are not one of those people, applause. You are probably underpaid and certainly a unicorn, but still, you know, let's just say you submitted your grant and now your grant proposal and you're waiting. Like, if those were waiting, I could understand putting a pause on it. But the grants that have been withheld have already been approved. We already know they're coming, and to cut those out also just shows how unreasonable and ill thought out this whole situation is. It made more sense to say, okay, we are going to put a pause on this program for next year. Whenever that was going to open,
Right.
we're not going to open it. We're just going to let these go out. And then after that, we have to pause and rethink all of this. They could have done that.
Well, that's true.
They didn't.
That's true with anything.
Hmm.
That's true with economies and trade wars. Um, Everything is, if you want somebody to ultimately succeed in staying afloat, and maybe that's not the goal. Maybe you're right. Maybe they're trying to fail as many people as they can,
Yeah.
which sounds like law school. Let's
Mhm.
see how many students we can drive to suicide before they get through the years of law school, right? That was
Yeah.
the old quote unquote joke about how hard law school was. But you give people, 6 months. This is what's going to happen in 6 months. Start now preparing. If you already have product that is, your corn is going to Ireland, well, okay, in 6 months you're going to have to change something
Mhm.
because they're going to have tariffs. But this is happening with a week's notice, 2 weeks notice.
Yeah.
Um,
And
we,
the world moves at such a rapid pace. Like,
yeah.
I was listening to a story, I will not go into detail, about how a freshman at a college, how a rumor went viral for her and completely ruined her life in a matter of days. Like, it was already on, like, widely publicated, syndicated
Mhm.
radio stations and networks that can really get that message out very quickly. And it's just that it moves so quickly. Like, all this breaking news is like they got it seconds ago, and it's
Right.
and it's out. You know,
So, okay, let's bring
crazy.
this back though to let's create our fictional nonprofit theater. Um,
randomanycompany.org.
yeah, what company is it?
randomanycompany.org.
Randomanycompany.org.
Here
Um,
at the RAC, we pride ourselves on being random. Do
So first argument.
we need a mission statement? We'll put one
Well,
together.
that's part of, now let's talk about chaos with that. And this is very important. So the chaos that already exists in many, not all, but in many nonprofits is the mission statement is so general. It fits what the requirements to be a nonprofit are, which there has to be an educational element, and then you can put on theater if that's the other part of it. But you got to have some of these goals. Otherwise, all you're doing is putting on commercial theater, right? You're charging money and you want to make money back. So the nonprofit is, we cannot break even at the amount we charge. We're being careful with our money, and we still can't break even. We need some support to bring the arts to whatever community cannot otherwise get it, or to bring whatever quality we can that they can't find for free somewhere else. That seems to me what most nonprofits are. But the artistic directors and the managing directors' jobs are to say to the staff, here's our goal this year. And the goal is not, oh, we're going to do 5 shows. The goal is not, oh, we're going to raise 65% of our budget through contributions. That's not a goal. That's a task, right? That's tasks. That's in order to do what your goal is. So what is your goal? And I have discovered, as someone like you who has worked with many nonprofits, that most artistic directors cannot define their goal other than, I want to put on X number of shows, and the shows should be hopeful, or the shows should show parts of our society, or the shows should be diverse. That's details. So we're stuck with very talented, well-meaning staffs who are in the middle of chaos, trying to figure out what they're supposed to do with their job when they're told, oh, and now we need to put a poster together, and the show's going up in 5 weeks. And so they run around and they put the poster together. But that's a chaos. That's a bit of chaos. That's what the world is feeling like right now. So what do we do? And is that the way we're supposed to work is the next issue. On the other hand, and I have an affinity to some of the way that commercial theater works, some of it. When we go into a production meeting for a show that has $30 million at stake, we expect everyone at that table to have all their ducks in order. They know how many weeks ahead they need to plan something. They know how much it costs if they bring in an extra 20 lighting elements. They know what a costume's going to cost if it has a trick switch in it.
Yeah.
These are experts. These are people with experience. They sit down, and then their assistants learn from them, and they know how many assistants they're going to need to do what they're being asked for. The producer and the general manager and the director are telling them what they're supposed to be accomplishing. And then all 200 people on a Broadway show work towards the same artistic and financial goal. It's a collaboration with a clear vision. We have one place to go. This is what we want to do on that stage. This is how many dances we have. This is how many people we need. Everyone is putting together their expertise. Where is the chaos in nonprofit? Why is that not also there? Is it because we can't afford to pay people to get the experts so that everybody is on a learning curve? Is that the chaos? Or is it the artistic directors don't know how to create a vision?
Well, I feel like there's a couple of things, at least, that are worth thinking about, right? We've talked many times about the value of putting as much support and resources you can into the artists who are carrying your mission forward, arguably. And um and I do think that scrappy leaders believe that they can wear many hats. You know, the producing artistic director is like four jobs, you know,
At,
and or
at least you're
yeah,
absolutely right. Yeah.
and makes sense when you're the founder of the company, but like, um, actually a sign of a company's success, at least in terms of like in the for-profit space, is when you grow, is when you bring more people in, when you realize that you can't do everything, and you will get more creativity, more ideas, more paths forward if you have more people at the table contributing to the conversation. That doesn't mean just go hire a million people, but it's like assess what you're doing that is arguably a waste of your time. Like, is there something that you should be doing that you don't have time to do because you're doing this? And then you hire and you put somebody on that so that you can focus, you know? But I feel like it's hard when you're just looking at um, the budget.
Mm.
And and I don't mean that somebody should be laser focused on the budget, right? Um, and make sure that we're staying within it, or as much as we can, like we're meeting grant requirements and all that good stuff. But somebody should also be encouraging us to actually do the necessary growth that we need to do. And if you already have that growth and you're struggling, you got to ask yourself, there's a company down the street who has a third of our staff, and they're struggling in a similar way. We're just struggling. We have more money that we need to acquire or pay off. And so we really should be coming together and saying, well, I'm Random Any Company over here, and I believe that if I had two more key people, I'd be able to raise more awareness about my work. I'd be able to get more people behind it to support it. Arguably, I believe that. But you have four people to the two people I need, and you're struggling too. And so the conversation here is like, please explain how your organization is struggling so I can understand the similarities and the differences, because I'm feeling like if I have more people, I'll be better off, but you have more people and you're not better off.
And my argument, and I'm playing devil's advocate on a
Mhm.
lot of this, but my argument from my experience in nonprofits, I have been in one that was, in my opinion, unbelievably successful because the chaos, that I'm using that term now as as a positive thing, the chaos was all creative.
Mm.
The organization supporting the creative was absolutely together, organized, administratively solid. Everyone knew what they were supposed to do, and they worked very hard. It wasn't like it was easy,
Mm.
but everyone understood their place and why they were doing it and what was expected of them. That can be done. And the other one was just the opposite. There was one person at the top who said, today I'm going to show you the way I do posters, and you got to learn to do it my way.
Mm.
Because the person they hired, and it could have been a budgetary reason, but the person that they were able to hire did not come with the same expertise as the person at the top. And plus, they were being asked to do something outside their sphere of talent, right? They could
Mhm.
still have a marketing brain, but they weren't necessarily a graphic designer,
Yeah.
right? And certainly, I do know that when you hire an ad agency, they have separate people who are graphic designers,
Mhm.
separate people who are creative designers, separate people who are business reps, separate people who are press people, separate people who know all the ad spaces and how to work deals on television. They're so separated, and certainly in the commercial world, you pay one lump sum to the company, and everybody's paid.
Mhm.
We don't have that in nonprofit. Nonprofit, it's everyone scrambling to fill positions that they didn't know they would have to fill because they come up almost as if it's a crisis that day,
Yeah.
even though it's not a crisis.
Mhm.
Theater is unbelievably complicated.
Hmm.
And I think we all, coming out of high school and college, don't know that, and I think that's where the chaos comes from. But I did want to at least re-mention the chaos that is creativity, I think is a good thing. That is where somebody, a funny story, because we need some humor in this discussion.
Only a smidge. Tread
There
lightly.
a a famous director, to remain nameless so I don't lose his friendship, called me, the manager, in the middle of rehearsals and said he wanted an elephant on stage and he wanted it by the next day.
Mm.
Now, we're in rehearsal. Let's just talk about logistics.
Yeah.
The elephants shit all the time. In addition, we are in New York City. Where does the elephant go? How do they fit into the rehearsal room? Where do they go overnight? What are they going to be doing? Et cetera, et cetera. None of this was part of the discussion. At the same point, we had a wonderful, exciting day trying to deal with this. It was fun. We the director got to explain what he was trying to do and why, and we got to ask him all these ridiculously normal questions. And of course, by the next day, the idea was out the window because it logistically can't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But we had done the research. We knew how to get him the elephant. We knew where the elephant was coming from, and we knew how much the elephant was going to cost. Yeah. So that's great resource fodder for whatever next show you're going to do, in case you're out, somewhere on somebody's farm. Anyway, that's fun. That is absolute fun in the middle of a very staid rehearsal process. Right? The chaos is when 10 weeks in advance that you need an elephant, and then the day before the elephant's due, you bring in an intern and say, find us an elephant.
Yes.
And that's my point. That's what's going on, one, in the economic situation right now in America and the world, but it's also, more importantly, going on every day in the nonprofit world, I think. Do you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of like, when I was at another nonprofit in 2020, I remembered I had an argument about remote work policies, and I was arguing this every week. I was like, we need one. You never know what's going to happen, and we want to be prepared. We can't just piecemeal this. And then I came to them the week, this week in March, and said, what if there is a situation where we cannot be in this building? What are we going to do then? I was like, there is potential for an emergency of that sort, and we're going to need a remote work policy, because you can't just create chaos in that situation. I'm so glad that I had already drafted this document. I was waiting for the okay to hand it to the leaders. And that was enough to be like, you know what, that's a good point. Let me bring that to them. And they came out of that meeting with the information about the pandemic.
Fantastic.
And so, I could have panicked and been justifiably frustrated about, I've got 2 days to figure out everybody can work remotely.
Right.
And I'm glad that I had thought about it ahead of time. I made a note here that said sometimes the chaos is creative pressure and the outcome can be rewarding. When I think it's easier with a what if, to figure out how you would solve that problem. And I always bring them up. And I think the people around me who are just looking for a yes, they often feel like, why do you have to bring up this hypothetical? I'm not bringing up a million. I'm bringing up this one.
Right.
because I feel like this one is more likely to happen. Like, I'm more than willing to be wrong. Let's have a conversation about if then, you know. And so I do see the value in it. I don't want to work in chaos, though. I want to acknowledge that chaos exists and get ahead of it. It doesn't mean I want to predict the future. That's not what I mean. I want to find a way for this chaos to not be chaos. It's just the business
Right.
of the day.
And we all acknowledge that there will always be some chaos.
Hmm.
But the key to that is it has to be manageable.
Yeah.
And that includes budgeting.
Yeah.
That we know that it's difficult, almost impossible for nonprofits to stay solvent
Hmm.
because they just need donors, whether it's government, foundations, or people. They just need them. That's
Hmm.
the way the nonprofit system is set up. You want to argue it shouldn't be, fine, but it is that way. So, along with that, you need to think before you are, and I'm going to again use an exact example of a nonprofit that's a wonderful educational only institution that discovered it was $250,000 in debt at the end of a year. And the question is, why didn't you know that earlier? Why did you not have a plan other than asking your board to cough up the money, which they could not do or would not do? You don't want to walk into these situations and just say, but we're creating art or we're doing education that's wonderful. Well, you know what? If you go away, there's still going to be art or education somewhere else.
Yeah.
So your job is to come up with the best you can what if, exactly what you said, Darnell. It's the what if. And sometimes, it's not the right answer. You're allowed to make mistakes. But when you don't plan ahead, you shouldn't be running a company.
Yeah.
But more than that, and this is my argument, if you are running a company, your people need to know what's expected. Where the great thing about theater is we all collaborate towards the same goal, whatever
Yeah.
that show is. Well, imagine somebody writes a show, you have a cast, and you go to the first rehearsal and nobody knows when it's officially opening. Nobody has started to advertise it. Nobody knows how much the tickets are. Nobody knows what the rehearsal schedule is. I mean, these answers are created by different people in the organization. But if no one sat them down and said, our goal is to put this show on in April, and we need to make sure we earn this amount of money. We need to make sure we have full houses. We need to make sure that this show shows us to be the best theater company in our town.
Mm.
If that's the goal, then everybody can sit around on their free time over dinner and say, oh, I have an idea how to do that. Oh, what if we offer group sales to this organization and give them a discount? Or maybe I know a great graphic artist who would probably do it for free if they give them some credit. Everyone can bring in their ideas, but if they don't know what you're aiming for, all you get is chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's always crazy. Like, I worked for an edutainment company, right? They arguably produce the same product every summer. They're more of a recreation thing. They are a tourist destination. And so even though they are nonprofit, their mission isn't arguably lofty, except for, uh, you know, they're retelling America's history. And so that is valuable because, whoever engages with their offering is going to be more knowledgeable about America's history. And so that is valuable for us to know. And I think a justified reason to continue existing as a nonprofit. Um, but at the same time, they are entertainment. They are recreational.
Hmm.
And so, like, the thing that's tricky about all of this is when there's a struggle, and it seems like I would love to be wrong. If there's a grant maker out there who wants to come talk to us, I would love that. To feel like, I wonder how much of this is going to make it, how much of this is going to survive. Now we're trying to say that's one bit of art or one offering is better than the other. And then that's where it gets sort of problematic because, you know, a smaller company might reach, let's say they reach a couple hundred people and they consistently reach them. They're just as valuable as the 20,000 people this other company reaches. And so when you get into that situation, it ends up being tricky, and you don't want, like, I don't want to say because my organization is struggling that I can't hear or see any other organization that's struggling. And I just, I think that's the part that makes this so tough. Like, we're not aggressively doing enough work to save ourselves. We're actually trying to save the community as a whole. And this is where it becomes, it's like we don't have enough people to think about the rest of the community, but we have to think about the rest of the community. And this is where art service organizations come in. They speak on behalf of all of us, or whoever's in membership or in community with them. But I think all of that just makes it even more problematic and more gray.
Well, you make a good point about the community, because theater is not competitive. Our history shows that when one show does very well, it helps the other shows because people get excited and they want to see more.
The jury's still out on Othello, but yeah.
No, it's not. Nobody cares.
But is it helping? Is it helping?
No, because we've got 4 celebrities. It's not just one. There are 4 shows with celebrities in them.
Yeah.
They're all doing well.
We're getting nosebleed tickets, audience. We're getting them.
Yeah, I'm not. You've lost me. You've lost me. I've seen great Othellos before, so unless you're going to tell me this one is better than the others, I don't care. I really don't care. But that's me, and that has nothing against Denzel or Jake. I mean, they're wonderful actors. That has nothing to do with it. But I'm one of those people who believes nothing is worth that price. It just isn't. Even if I had it to throw, it's just not. It's the same thing. I love Rolls Royce. I love a Rolls Royce. I don't need to buy one, but I do appreciate them tremendously.
If I had money to throw, I would yank it out of my pocket and then gently place it back in there. I'm sorry. I was angry.
I heard a great line the other day that said, "You know how to double your money?
Fold it in half.
Fold it in half and put it back in your pocket."
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
then just pretend you don't have it, because then it's a huge plus.
Yeah. We're struggling. We're all struggling with the concepts of if this is our hard-earned money, and if the economy is precarious, how do we choose what is important to give our money to? If we have enough to give it. I would argue, as happened certainly during the pandemic, that sometimes you help your neighbor. And that means literally a person who goes, "Oh my God, she's 90 years old. She's having trouble eating. She's getting, the free food from the charities that come to her door, but she can't always answer her door." So what you do is you help her both by answering her door for her and maybe buying a few things for her. And that's where you put your money.
Yeah.
Right? That's more direct than me saying, "Well, I adore this particular theater company nearby. and I normally would support them, but I only have X amount of money and I'm a little worried.
Yeah.
So either I'm reducing how much I give them, or this year I'm not giving. And I fear for all of us in the arts that the pandemic was one problem because they just shut us down. And now we're about to hit the next problem, which, because as much as I argue about what nonprofits ought to do, I still want theater to thrive. I want our community to take chances, and that takes money.
It's interesting because people shouldn't feel guilty for scaling back their support, but support is so scarce that if they do that, it has huge ramifications. And I feel like that is a situation that the whole community needs to really think about. It's like
And
we rely on.
I'm jumping on your phrase.
Mhm.
This is the time to say what if and plan ahead, because if you're lucky enough to continue to get the kind of support you want, and if the situation works out, or all of a sudden you get a surprise support from some corporation or whatever, that's great.
Mhm.
But we must anticipate that it won't be there.
Mhm.
And if you wait until the last second and go, oh, now I'm $250,000 in debt, like this other organization,
Yeah.
then to me, you shouldn't exist. You did not plan. You messed up.
Yeah, and now somebody has to dig you out of a hole before
Which
you can even do anything meaningful.
And instead of digging you out of a hole, why not give it to another company that didn't get in a hole because they know how to use their money correctly?
Which I understand that in the mindset of a grant maker. I understand that. And I know that it's more nuanced than I like coming at it from this position. I know that I don't have all the information. This is just how I see it. And I feel like a prospective donor or a current donor would say the same thing. They're not experts in philanthropy. Everybody's not. They just know that they want to give a certain amount to charity, and that they like this organization, they want to support them. But if something changes in their life and they can't continue doing that, they may just stop if it's not automated. If they have to be glad-handed by a meeting or an overpriced dinner to decide if they're going to support you again. All of this fanfare for me to say, it's just tight. My wife and I had a conversation, my partner and I had a conversation, and we decided we're just going to lay in wait. I don't know. It's
I think more than the what if, I think that's exactly where everybody is at right now. It could, a month from now, it could be different. There's so much chaos going on at the moment. And when I have no idea when our listeners will be listening to this, but my guess is the chaos is going to go on for a while. And when you have uncertainty, you try to create some certainty in your own life, which means you don't throw the money around. You carefully slide it under the table, if that's the word.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So again, how do you convince somebody that you're it? And that's part of what the organizations need to do when they're planning the what if. There are two parts to it. What if no one gives us money? What do we do then? The other part is, what if somebody's willing to give us money, but they need some stimulus? What are we going to do for that? And the two parts of that, you're laughing. I know where your brain goes, Darnell.
There's a commercial that's on all the time, and they say, I have a structured settlement, but I need cash now. I'm here producing theater and I need cash now. Yes, it's oh man. I lost my train of thought. I had that sitting in there. Oh, yeah. So we did talk about the negatives of this chaos, but are there any positives?
Well,
and so I'll caveat.
Go ahead.
So, for instance, everybody's not in the stock market, but if you are, you know that the general mindset is to buy low and sell high. And so some people are looking at the stock market as an opportunity to buy
Hmm.
in because it's low and it's not going to disappear completely. This is a moment. And we just don't know how long that moment's going to last. And sometimes, a business or somebody who has a lot at stake here can't afford to wait it out, and so they might make a choice to sell, and they might sell so that they can buy something else. And we don't know that, but all we know is that the stock market dropped and everybody's freaking out by that. But in that case, there is an opportunity if you had money um, to invest low, while it's low, and then keep an eye on it. But is there a positive to this chaos for theater? Like, if everybody's feeling uncertain, is the mindset to flock to a theater for understanding or some conversation that brings us joy? For example, one of our colleagues mentioned that over the weekend they participated in the hands off march
Hmm.
and said that they needed to feel a part of something and just needed a little bit of inspiration, and being around all these people who are not about to take this lying down made them feel a little better about the whole situation. I always
Well,
have my issues with protests because I'm a reluctant activist. And so I understand why it matters to so many people, but I just see a lot of issues with it.
well, you just, I think, unknowingly hit upon a what if.
Mhm.
Um, Under these circumstances, and I've noticed this as recently as today, that when we talk about people who donate or invest in theater, what are their motivations? In the past, the people who invest versus the people who donate, people who invest, I this is a big generality.
Mhm.
It was so that they could take their nephew to opening night and feel like a big person and feel part of something exciting in their life, and they're willing to risk a lot of money because they had it to throw around. That's part of what it is. And it's gambling,
Mhm.
and there's an excitement to that. What is the nonprofit motivation? It used to be when you could write off a lot more of your donation,
Mhm.
right? The end of the year, fiscal year, the tax season, people would
Mhm.
throw money
Which
at
is another
nonprofits.
change which is another change this
Right. It
the
doesn't
past
have,
administration did.
it isn't, it's much more limited now, and I don't
Yeah.
want to discourage anybody, but
Mhm.
that could help change things.
Yeah.
But it doesn't exist. So the what if is, what if it doesn't change? So now, what is another reason? You brought it up, belonging to something.
Mhm.
So now I've noticed in a discussion I had with some people that being a part of the process of theater, even though they have full time jobs, was of interest to them.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know how you do that when somebody has a full time job, because theater is day and night,
Yeah.
right? It's right through. So just inviting them to rehearsal may be enough for somebody.
Mhm.
Maybe for somebody else, having a weekly Zoom session with the producer or somebody or the director, which is not fun. I mean, it's a lot of time, but maybe that's what they're after. They don't know, in at least in my discussion, because when I asked, they weren't sure. But it does mean that we in the theater may need to come up with, how do you make your donators, your contributors, feel like they belong?
Mm.
Subscriptions, nah, they already know about those. I don't think that's special, but we haven't done enough, or else we need to change it under these current circumstances.
Yeah.
And that's just one thing to think of.
Mhm.
I certainly don't have the answers. All I know is we're in tough position. The other thing which I brought up before, the good chaos is when you have a bunch of creative people, including management, because I always think of management as creative management, because you're trying to create something out of nothing. And you have to make sure the money's going in the right place. You have to understand how to move $100,000 in a costume budget over to the set rather than say, no, you can't build that part of the set.
Yeah.
So you have to be open to that kind of chaos. The problem is, so that's good. You have a bunch of the director, the choreographer, the actors, everyone's saying, oh, what if we did this? Oh, what if we did that? Instead of saying, oh, no, it's not in the budget, you want to go, let's see how we make this work. That is when chaos, which is part of our art form, is phenomenal. It is so much fun. I mean, the stories that go to Lion King. Imagine you have the movie The Lion King, and in comes Julie Taymor saying, "I want puppets, and the puppets should be on people." I mean, come on, really?
They
Right?
need strong necks too.
Right? Yeah, and they need chiropractors, and I want materials from Africa, which are going to cost twice as much as anything that I could get on Canal Street in New York City.
Mm.
And somebody approved it. That is the kind of chaos that creates great work,
Mhm.
right? Ragtime, which was the same year as Lion King, had 40 something people in the cast. Most Broadway musicals have 20.
Mm.
That's the number that is usually budgeted into a Broadway cast for a musical. 20, 21, somewhere in there. If you can get it lower, you can save some money. Well, they had 40 plus and a giant orchestra. Somebody had to say, okay, we're taking the risk. The biggest one that I'm still in awe of is Harry Potter.
Hmm.
Somebody goes to the movie studio and says, I want to do 7 movies, and I want different directors, and I want every detail exactly as in the book, and we have to have magic and special effects, and we have to have 3-hour movies, and we're going to guarantee. I mean, come on, who was the suit in that management position that said, go for it?
Well, it did have a fan base that came along with it.
That's part, but that's it.
Yeah.
But you balance these things, right? And Lion King had a movie before it. I
Yeah.
got it. But it was still a radical take. Certainly you can do Harry Potter and make it cheaper. There are ways to do it, right?
That's a good example too, because another note that I wrote was, we're assuming that in tough times everyone is scaling back, but people have prioritized things that they will never compromise in any situation. And so, like I often say this in our office, like we're trying to decide what is the right course of action. And I'm saying, like, we always, I sometimes feel like we are concerned for our prospective customer, our prospective patron, like whether, I think if we actually state how much we really need to, charge for this option, like they're going to turn away from it. But the thing is, they don't know. They don't know how much it costs for us to present this, and they don't necessarily care if they understand why. It's just like you were saying earlier about if you don't understand, if your team doesn't understand why we're moving in this direction, they can't get behind it. They can't support it. They won't be motivated to do whatever it takes to get it done. But the same thing with patrons. I'm saying, like, if we adjust our ticket price by $5 or $10 or something, this may not be noticeable if what we're doing is something they want to be a part of. It's a conversation they want to engage in, but if we don't do anything different, I don't know. Like, I wonder if it's hard for a dance company or an opera company who's doing the Nutcracker, and the Nutcracker is not going to change. There's nothing different, arguably, but if they raise the price, will that change the patron's mind? Or do they know this is a holiday thing? They always do it. There's tradition tied to it. They're not about to let what's going on in the world stand in the way of their family, experiencing this like they do every year.
And business people, their job is to say, where is that line
Uh-huh.
after which we're going to lose people?
Yeah.
And obviously $900+ for Denzel Washington is not a line
Hmm.
that created a problem. They're sold out.
Yeah.
What, you're right? Who cares?
Well,
Um,
and I
except that it affects, I think, people looking at the rest of Broadway and thinking it's too expensive.
Yeah. But I also feel like in these situations, I think it's more important to get our message out as early as possible because there's a lot you can do. Like for example, when an organization announces their subscription, they do an early bird. Or if they haven't announced their whole season, they will do a leap of faith. Encouraging people to get on board now. If we pepper out one or two of our shows for the season, if you know the direction we're going in, you might get involved now, and that'll be good for us right now. And we'll be able to feel more confident about moving forward because we got this early support. And so I do see the value in that, but I often think it's compromised by the struggle of the chaos. You know, everybody's already in this mindset of like, we have to tighten our belts. But perhaps we need to prompt for what our future plans are. Like
That,
we need to let them know what we're planning
but
so that this show
and
doesn't
why?
fall off.
And why?
And
That
why?
is,
Yeah.
again, that's it. If the staff and the creative and administrative staff of a theater company is focused on a mission, then it's easier to let the public know what it is, and the public can, if they get excited, the public will support it. But you have to have a mission that's clear and exciting,
Yeah.
because just putting on a show in of itself isn't exciting. I can go, I mean, certainly here in New York, we've talked about, I can see 20 things a night I get invited to, and those are the free shows that I can see, right? And then if I want to go see something on Broadway or off Broadway, or God forbid I see a film, there's so much to do here. You also in Philadelphia, there are a lot of options.
Mhm.
So you have all those options, which bless us that we have this as
I
a
know. I do not take that lightly.
right. Not at all. I mean, you can be in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I played there once, and they have one major theater. It doesn't mean they don't have smaller ones,
Mhm.
but they have one major one. That's a different situation. But we're not there. So for us, I mean, for Kalamazoo, they may just be able to say our mission is just to put on theater for our neighbors, and that may be enough. But if you really want some major support, what are you doing? Are you trying to help original playwrights from your area? Are you trying to make sure that children have a place to go during the day to
Mm.
work on creative things? Are you trying to make sure that every month there's something that no one in that area has ever seen before?
Mm.
I mean, each one of these things can be exciting, but most of the theater companies I see only advertise the individual show you're about to see. And since I know nothing about the show, except if it came from a movie, and then I know what the plot is. But other than that, I'm waiting for word of mouth, which means I'm not rushing in there on the first week.
Yeah.
Right. And that's when these nonprofits need all the help the first week.
Hmm.
So there's got to be more than just putting on whatever show you're doing.
Yeah.
I will say, when I worked at Barrington Stage, that community knew that during the summer, Barrington Stage put on quality work. Julie Boyd, the artistic director at the time who created that theater company, she made sure that community knew she was putting on something that they'd be proud of, and they showed up for it.
Mm.
That doesn't mean she didn't need to raise money from a whole bunch of people, but that's what the community needed. That's different than a different kind of mission.
Well, I often feel like, you know, the conversation that we're trying to have with this piece that we're bringing to the stage, it happens during the production instead of before the production. Now, some companies are very savvy. They put out a lot of supplemental or supportive information, like study guides
Right.
and just think pieces that are on elements of the show. Essentially, the dramaturgy packet has been repackaged for the audience, and I do appreciate that. I think that does um, validate the work more, because we're not just seeing the show. There's all this supportive information that's putting us in um, the setting of that
Mhm.
piece, like allowing us to understand this foundational, if you want it, you know. But somebody put effort into doing that. But often, a company that doesn't have all those resources or can't think about it too soon will just wait. They might have a community partner. They'll have a talk back one or two times during the show, and it is like pulling teeth to get people to stay, unless they booked it with the post show in mind.
Right. Well, and you mentioned it. When you don't have the resources, some of and this is again focusing your mission. If you ask 6 24-year-olds to do the job of 20 35-year-olds
Mhm.
because you just think you want to do it, it's not going to work.
Yeah,
But if you say, okay, we're refining our mission to something that the people we have can do well,
yeah,
and we're going to clearly explain that as far ahead as possible, and we're going to try to excite, that's the key word, excite an audience and contributors to want to support us or the show. But you can't burn out your staff just because you want a study guide, unless you have someone on staff who that's their forte and they have a PhD in study guides. That's great. So you use their talents, but that's not going to convince me to buy a ticket to your show or to give you $100 donation, right? By
yeah,
itself.
yeah.
But but if I know that you're doing, there are companies that only do Shakespeare.
Hmm.
Well, if you're a supporter of Shakespeare, you know why you're giving money to that company.
Yeah. But it's also valuable for that company to say this timeless playwright, uh, you know, is often returned to in moments like this. This particular
Absolutely.
piece speaks to these elements of struggle and power that we're going through right now. And it also talks about how people can be easily manipulated and how those games create, amazing consequences and so on. Yeah. And so I think,
Well, again,
we know that
you're
when
talking.
we
I'm
we
interested. You're talking about promotion of a show, and I'm still talking about the larger mission
but it's
focus.
but it's still answering the question why, why are you
Hmm.
doing this? And so I feel like it is helpful to not just say we're doing this show, and not just say that, oh, remember that star, or maybe that actor, they're in it. That's not enough. You gotta be. I think it is helpful. There's a lot of people who don't understand Shakespeare. If you're not a theater person, you don't understand Shakespeare. And so it has to be sort of explained. You have to
Yeah,
point these elements out so that people understand and say, oh, interesting. This was what, the 1500s? I don't know. Shakespeare? What is Shakespeare's time?
you got to
I'm
look it
drawing
up.
a blank here. But you know, I think it's helpful for someone to understand, like, why a playwright and poet from, was born in the 1600s, well, 1564. Um, why their work is still relevant today. And then it talks about why so many other elements of work are relevant today, and how so many pieces of art that are expressed today are inspired by work that has stood the test of time. Why libraries still matter. Why, if you don't go engage in those books, that doesn't mean you close a library. Because without that, like, we forget, if you didn't hear any of these stories, you wouldn't know that every time they took over a civilization, they burned everything. They burned everything about their culture
Or in case of Rome, they buried it.
to erase them, and
They absolutely erased it.
force them
Yeah.
to assimilate to a new way. And everybody's so there's a good portion of society that is so complacent that they just go, this is so crazy. It's never better on either side. That's why I don't pay any attention to it. This is what they want you to do. The people who are filthy rich, they want you to not care. They want you to feel like you're so out of reach, you would never experience this kind of wealth. And since you won't, let's not be concerned about them at all.
Well, and we're a little off track with theater, but
No,
the
it's
point.
still there. You know how I bring it back?
How?
Those people with the money support theater. The question is why and how.
Very valid. Very valid question. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the truth is that is the problem, in that theater is so expensive. We need people with real money to be the ones supporting it, which then often changes what theaters decide to do. And that's another big problem, but that's another discussion.
Yeah.
Right now, it's still about focusing. And my thing is, if the artistic director or whoever is in charge can focus the purpose of a theater, then those people, rich or not, who agree with it will support it rather than try to change it.
Yeah.
And because you don't want someone coming in and saying, "Oh, I only want Hello Dolly at this theater," when you're trying to do Shakespeare first. But if you say we're doing Shakespeare, then fine. You either give us money for that or go away.
Yeah.
And that's where both the strength of an artistic vision for a theater company ought to be.
Mm-hmm. And that's the business. That's the business of theater, a working title. I'm Darnell Radford.
I'm Mitch Weiss.
And we will see you at the theater.
We hope.
Outside shilling for coins. We'll be out there. We'll see you at the theater.
Donate.
One day we've got to solve this.
We are solving it.
All right. That was a good chat.
Yeah.
Good chat. Yeah.